1920s. That was a little musical interlude for you. Okay, turning my speaker off, getting the notes out. So, welcome to video one of Dr. Russell's book club for the Great Gatsby. Before we can start talking about the Great Gatsby, we have to talk about the Roaring Twenties and why the Roaring Twenties were roaring. So, I have my notes, which is what I'm looking at. I have my coffee. It's just like being in class, except I'm sitting on my couch. So, The Great Gatsby is literally the most popular American classic piece of literature ever. I read it in ninth grade. People have been reading The Great Gatsby in ninth grade forever. I think my parents probably read it in the ninth grade too. So you're now a part of a very exclusive club of people who have read The Great Gatsby and love The Great Gatsby. It was published in 1925, so it's almost 100 years old. Almost. So, the Roaring Twenties were roaring because the world was changing in all these ridiculous ways. The first way that I want to tell you is that they had all survived the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu was a pandemic, much like what we're going through right now with COVID-19. So maybe, we have, in a little bit, we're going to have the Roaring 2020s. People were very excited to have survived this big moment in history, to be able to go out of their houses without masks on, to not have to be scared they were going to be sick. So that was enough to celebrate anyway. But there's so much more to talk about. So, number one, end of the Spanish flu. We have survived a pandemic. Number two, it was the end of World War I. So we have now, our people have come back home from the war. We have been sort of victorious in so far as you can be victorious in a global war. The other thing that happens at the end of the war, the economy goes way up. So now we have money to spend. We have all the money to spend on leisurely things. We don't have to just spend our money on like food and clothes or survival essential things. We can now spend our money on going to movies. We can go to parties. The movies were called Nickelodeons at the time. So the word Nickelodeon, it's because it costs a nickel. And that is where your television channel word comes from. Now we've got movies. We can go to the movies on Friday night. So that's number two. End of pandemic, number one. Number two, end of World War I. Women have the right to vote. Oh my God. So now women are more independent. They're really getting into their power and they create this sort of identity. There's this group of women and they were called flappers. So if you've ever seen pictures of the 1920s with the women with the dresses, with the like fringy dresses and these bob haircuts and they're doing all these funny dances, those are flappers. That comes from the 1920s. So now you've got short hair, short skirts. We're not wearing corsets anymore. Whoa. We're showing a little ankle, a little shin. Oh my God. Women are completely going nuts out here with their freedom and their independence. So that's number three. Prohibition. Prohibition is essentially it is it makes alcohol illegal. So at one point, drinking alcohol during the 1920s was very illegal. It was something called the temperance movement. So those people felt like alcohol was making everybody evil and we should all stop drinking it. And it was dangerous. It's still dangerous. We know that. So they weren't 100% wrong. But it's hard for us to imagine a world where alcohol is illegal. At least it is for me. But during the 1920s, alcohol is illegal. Now, as you can probably imagine, that didn't stop anybody from drinking it. If alcohol is legal right now. If tomorrow the government decided that alcohol was going to be illegal, I'm sure you understand that people are going to find ways to drink it, and they did. So they went to these places called speakeasies, which were these kind of secret underground clubs that would be playing music like the music that I was just playing before. And they'd be dancing and drinking this sort of illegal alcohol. People also made alcohol in like bathtubs and in all kinds of ways, secretive ways of drinking alcohol. Prohibition did not stop anybody from drinking. What else is happening in the 1920s? Man, the Italian mafia taken over New York City, which is where the Great Gatsby is set. So the mafia is taking over everything. They're running the speakeasies. They're running the illegal alcohol business. Gangsters are in charge. They are in control. Um, and then you have cars. So more people are driving. So now we have way more freedom. So before that, you'd have to use like a horse and buggy to get around, or people walked, or so you didn't really go outside of your neighborhood very much. But now people have cars, and they're becoming more accessible and available to everyone. So now we've got all this freedom. We can go all over the place. So that's a new thing too. So just to recap, right? We've survived a global pandemic. We have survived a world war. Women have the right to vote and are more independent than they have ever been. Their skirts are shorter. Their hair is shorter. They're doing all kinds of stuff that they weren't doing before that. We're showing ankle. Prohibition. Alcohol is illegal, so we got this whole underground system for how we can continue to get our liquor because we couldn't have it before, or we can't have it now because it's illegal. Then we got the mafia running around and doing all kinds of mess to control the city, more impactful than politicians, the mafia. And then we have cars. So we can drive all over the place. We can go all kinds of places we couldn't go before. You know how much easier it is to get from New York to New Jersey or New Jersey to New York in a car than it is on like a horse and buggy or a train or a boat? Um, so those are all the ways that the Roaring Twenties were roaring because there's a lot going on. And what we're seeing in The Great Gatsby is like on 10 of all of that. So there's that. Lastly, um, a term that was coined by F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, the Jazz Age. That is what he calls the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age. So the first reason why it's called the Jazz Age is obviously because jazz came out. Jazz is not the kind of jazz you think about now. Now we think about jazz as like elevator music and it's kind of boring. Then, as you heard in the song before, jazz was dancing music, right? You're going to the speakeasy, you're hanging out with your friends, you're meeting all these new people, you might be flirting with somebody at the speakeasy, drinking your illegal alcohol, and you're listening to jazz. Like, it was a total party. Um, but the other reason why the Jazz Age is called the Jazz Age is because we've got new technology. So people have radios in their houses now. So now we can hear music all the time, when before you would have to like go to the symphony or go out to hear live musical performances. Well, now it's really easy. We can hear it on the radio all the time, and that's much less expensive than having to buy like records, which were very expensive at the time. The Jazz Age is way more carefree. We have a lot more freedom happening. It's just extra. Like, it's lit. That's what he's trying to say by the Jazz Age. And it's run by young people. So we're talking about people who are in their teens, like you are, in their 20s. This is the Jazz Age. And that's a very, very new thing. Young people didn't have the kind of voice before that than they started having in the 1920s. And that's sort of the beginning of where we get this huge push for young people in popular culture now. So it's kind of started then. So just to recap again, the Roaring Twenties are roaring because we survived a pandemic, we survived a war, women have the right to vote, prohibition is happening, so we're finding all these great underground parties to go to. The Italian mafia and the gangsters are running everything. People are driving all over the place and we couldn't drive anymore. And we're in the middle of the Jazz Age because everybody's having a great time. And that, my friends, is why the Roaring Twenties is roaring. And that is where we find ourselves in The Great Gatsby. So, until our next video, which will be on chapters 1 and chapters 2, chapter 1 and chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby, that has been your quick and dirty on the Jazz Age. And I'll see you next time for Dr. Russell's Book Club with coffee.